Okay, we are living under a shadow government. There are billionaires and self-proclaimed elites that think that they know best what we should do with our lives, with the world. They want this one world government, this new world order. To help me understand all of that, I have my special guest, Kent Heckenlively. Kent, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to go through some big stories in the news with you, get your thoughts on that. But first, wanted to give some background just so people know who you are. You're an author, a writer. You've co-authored many books about the awfulness of Dr. Anthony Fauci, how we were misled about the masks, forced vaccine mandates. You've also co-written with Alex Jones about how the self-proclaimed elites want to reset the world and depopulate the human population. I wanted to ask you something. Is the CIA giving accurate information to the sitting presidents of the United States and former presidents in their daily briefing? My worry is that they're providing intel that keeps the CIA alive and pushes forward the stories that they want the world to know about.
It's a great question, and that is probably the central question of my new book that I'm working on with a guy named Kevin Shipp, who was a 17-year employee of the Central Intelligence Agency, worked in all 4 directorates. And so our book is called Twilight of the Shadow Government. And I think probably it's important for people to realize that the question that you asked has been asked since the very founding of the CIA. A month after President Kennedy was assassinated in November of 1963, former President Harry Truman published a very interesting op-ed in which he asked that very question. And so what Truman had said is that it's very important for a president to get as raw intelligence as he can, because the CIA or whoever is presenting that information is going to slant the information. So you want to get as raw intelligence as you can, because one of the things that you can't really figure out oftentimes is what's in somebody's mind. Now, my co-author on Twilight of the Shadow Government, was a CIA analyst in addition to being an operative. And so the stories that he tells me and we tell in this book about what happens behind the scenes at the CIA raises questions about whether you can ever let any group of individuals work in secrecy. There may be a time when operational security is important, but maybe after a period of 5 to 10 years, all the information should come out. And I think a lot of people are looking into this question, and they're asking questions not just about why we can't have all the files released on the JFK assassination. They're wondering why we can't have all the files released on September 11th. And they're wondering why pharmaceutical manufacturers want the information on their trials of vaccines hidden for 75 years. So the secrecy does not serve us.
Yeah, I mean, just going off of that last comment, Pfizer and others, like you said, they wanted their data buried for 75 years. Well, that's multiple generations away from the COVID lockdowns. And here, 3 years out, we've just learned AstraZeneca is being pulled globally because they're causing blood clots, they're causing heart attacks, stroke. It's killing people. And yet they wanted all of that information buried. I mean, granted, they have immunity regardless, but this operating in secrecy, like you say, is super damaging to trust and also to the human population.
Yeah. So, I mean, just so people understand what's going on, there were 4 different vaccine manufacturers. There's Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, and now those 2 have been pulled, and we've got Pfizer and Moderna, I believe. And so, The truth comes out. And I think what's really something that I want people to understand about the book, which they can buy on, they can pre-order on Amazon right now, Twilight of the Shadow Government, is that we take the point of view that the truth wants to come out. I think that people always worry about these intelligence agencies and them concealing information. A lot of people think that as these intelligence agencies get bigger, that they get more powerful. One of the interesting facts to realize is that in East Germany, before the wall fell, they had a population of about 16 million people, but they had roughly 500,000 to, by some estimates, 2 million informers. Okay. Those 2 million informers did not keep East Germany from falling. So I think that as we get to talk more and more about the role of the intelligence agencies in America, it only makes them weaker and weaker. And so we just have to keep talking.
Yeah, they say sunshine is the cure for some of these problems, just casting light on the problem. That's interesting. I didn't realize that there were like 2 million informants. That it kind of reminds me of Biden wanting to have between 20 to 60,000 green energy people going around the country, tattletelling on each other on whether, you're polluting too much or something like that. So, okay. So the other thing that I wanted to ask you from your research is I had a former CIA operative on my show. He's a fairly young guy. When I asked him if the CIA was infiltrating the mainstream media, he laughed and then said, "Not to my knowledge." But as I do research, there's this Project Mockingbird, where the CIA was infiltrating the mainstream media in order to control the information and the narrative. Is there any truth to Project Mockingbird?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Project Mockingbird is one of the most thoroughly covered subjects in the history of the CIA. And, strangely enough, Carl Bernstein of Watergate fame, of Woodward and Bernstein, probably wrote one of the most definitive pieces on Project Mockingbird in 1977 in Rolling Stones, a 24,000 word piece. And so that's been abundantly documented. But what people don't understand is that it really never went away, because what we do is we go into books written by CIA agents and directors where they talk specifically about the need to propagandize the public. And so one of the things that we also cover is there's something now called the Global Engagement Center, which started right before Trump took office. It was an Obama effort. And so it was supposed to counter the propaganda coming from ISIS. But, a year or so later, it gets fixed to be, against China and Russia and any non-state actor who is acting against the interests of the United States. And you go, they just wrote the damn thing into law. So it is legal for the intelligence agencies to propagandize against the American public. What's also really hilarious, I'm trained as an attorney, okay? So I'm always looking for the law, okay? I'm looking for the authority. And when you look at the law on what the CIA can do with journalists, they have these provisions. Like provision A is you cannot unknowingly, utilize a journalist. You cannot, lie to the journalist, okay? And pretend that you're not CIA, or use the journalist without their knowledge. And you go, oh, okay, well, all right, I guess that's end of story. They can't use journalists. And then you go to provision B. Well, you can tell the journalist that you're CIA, and you can ask if they're okay with you divulging information to them. And if they do it, you can lie, you can tell lies to the public as long as the journalist kind of knows. And I'm thinking to myself, oh man, that is a loophole you can drive a Mack truck through. And so, especially now that it's written into law with the Global Engagement Center, for God's sakes, I mean, all you have to claim is that, oh, some foreign entity covered this news, so this news is coming from a foreign source, and we have to fight that foreign misinformation. So, yeah, if it's not expressly prohibited, everybody should just be under the assumption that they're doing it like crazy. And you know what's really interesting also, I wrote this book. I've done 4 books with Project Veritas whistleblowers. Okay, before Project Veritas, you know, flew apart. Okay, one of them was called This Was CNN. It was a CNN whistleblower, and I paid this research group a lot of money to do a deep dive into CNN. And the guys came back to me, and they're like, Kent, we have something that's really kind of disturbing to tell you about. And I said, what? And they go, well, we've identified 21 top journalists and executives who we think have intelligence backgrounds. And I'm like, what? At CNN? How? And he goes, it's really interesting. What they do is they'll leave journalism for a year or two to go work for the government. Okay. And the most extreme example of it, and I heard about this, is pretty much don't trust any national security correspondent you see, because the national security correspondents are inevitably spooks. Okay. The biggest example of that is a guy named Jim Sakudo, who's a national security correspondent for CNN. Well, all you have to do is go to his LinkedIn page, and it talks about how for 18 months in, I think, 2011, 2012, he left journalism to become chief of staff at the US Embassy in Beijing, China, and special advisor to the ambassador. And I'm saying to myself, for God's sakes, Jim Sakudo, they want us to believe that Jim Sakudo was able to be chief of mission in Beijing, China, where our deepest, darkest secrets would go through his hands, and then he's going to get back on the air at CNN and stick it to the government? No way. He's under all these security oaths and everything. And to find like 21 of these guys, and you're saying to yourself, Jesus, what the heck is going on? And you would find people at all sorts of levels. Like, why would a journalist ever go to work for the government? I mean, it used to be that in journalism the standard was that you wouldn't go to dinner with a politician for fear of it compromising your objectivity. Now you've got these journalists who are going to work for the State Department, where, let's be honest, they're spooks. Okay, it's spook light. Okay, you leave the CIA, you go to work for the State Department. Do you think you suddenly became a diplomat? No, you're a spy with official cover. So we're being propagandized like crazy.
Yeah, a good example of that, Ken. I don't know if you saw that this kind of just came out this morning, but former CNN news anchor Chris Cuomo, who harassed unvaccinated people, harassed people who didn't wear masks, harassed people that questioned Fauci and the government, that had the temerity and the audacity to use ivermectin, tried to smear them as getting medical advice from veterinarians. He just admitted on the Patrick Bet-David podcast that he takes ivermectin every day, that his doctor literally put him on the drug that he demonized and told him, you are most likely vaccine damaged. I mean, like, this is like poetic justice, but it's also like, I'm not saying he's a CIA spook or something like that, but he was definitely taking orders about what to say on live TV to his audience about the COVID misinformation stuff.
Yeah, it's just really remarkable. Once you get into your mind the idea that there are agendas at play, all of this, starts to make a certain kind of sense. I mean, so I'm working on this book about the CIA, right? And I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, all right, I've really finally done it. I'm going after the book that's going to get me killed, right? And
Oh,
there's so much that is publicly available, and it cracks me up because right now, what I say is these spooks can't shut their goddamn mouths about what they're doing. So they're always writing books like, Alan Dulles, wrote a book called The Craft of Intelligence. And he's telling you how to do dirty tricks. So I'm thinking to myself, am I doing something dangerous by writing this book? And I'm saying, like, no, it's all out there because human beings want to tell the truth. We want to live in an honest world. And it's why, actually, if there's anybody out there who's thinking the CIA is a good job, here's what I have to tell you. You are going to suffer if you go into the CIA because the rates of burnout and alcoholism and divorce, I mean, living a secret life is not conducive to human happiness and health. And that is why I believe that we in the public will overcome the secrecy which is plaguing our government and our country right now. Because the people who are in the CIA know more intimately than somebody like I would how sick it is in there. And they are going to turn this around from the inside.
yeah. I think there's a phrase in AA. You're only as sick as your secrets. I mean,
Yeah.
talk about an entire organization built on secrets. And just a side note to my viewers, the U.S. government did more to shut down ivermectin than they did fentanyl. Chew on that for a second. Okay, now, Kent, right before the 2020 election, 51 former intelligence officers came forward, knowingly lied in an affidavit letter that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation and reminded us that President Trump was most likely in bed with Russia, not Hunter Biden, and then Biden wins the election. Why is there no accountability? We know for a fact those 51 people lied to the American public. Is it because their friends at the CIA, FBI, and NSA will cover for them?
It's because the crooks are in charge, okay? And what we need to do is we need to just keep talking about this stuff because I think that what's going to happen in the United States in 2024, 2025 is going to be like the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, because what happened when Eastern Europe fell, and it's a great story that, there was some, guard station in the Berlin Wall, and a rumor went out that the crossing was open, and thousands of people just started going there. And the guards are standing there going, we didn't hear anything about this. And the guards are saying to themselves, should we shoot these people? There are hundreds, if not thousands of them. And the guard just said, let them through.
Wow.
There is going to be a moment like that in the next year. I don't know what it's going to be. I hope that this happens without violence. I think it will happen without significant violence, but the system is just in the throes of falling apart. And what we have to do is we just have to keep banging against that wall, saying the things that we do, because that wall is so fragile, and they're terrified. I mean, what do you do when people, not only like Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan, come out, but when you got Chris Cuomo switching sides? I mean, that's a huge thing. Yes, I wrote about Fauci back in 2014. So is there one part of me which wants to take Chris Cuomo and throw him up against the wall for the kind of stuff he's done? Yeah, there's another part of me that wants to throw my arms around him and hug him and say, welcome to the side of the angels, buddy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to watch people be red pilled, and yet you have to let go of the feelings. It's the only way to move forward. But I totally hear what you're saying. You've got another book out. It's already been out, but I'm going to encourage people to check it out. You've got the King of Italy. Tell me about that, and then I want to ask you a couple of questions about what it was like to work with Alex Jones. So tell me about the King of Italy.
Yeah, so The King of Italy, it's a passion project of mine. It's been a book that I've been playing around with for about 20, 30 years. And I kind of think like Andrew Breitbart always said that politics is downstream from culture. And I've always loved my Italian heritage. And while I love The Godfather, I don't think that like it's a representative of Italian Americans. And I kind of came up with this historical fiction that takes place in the United States and in Italy. People don't realize Italy had its own monarchy. And there's just a thrilling story in that. And I think it's helpful for our times, because I am concerned that while I am a strong capitalist, just because you're a capitalist doesn't mean necessarily you're a good person. De Tocqueville said, America is good because we are religious. And so the story that I really tell in The King of Italy is about what it means to be a shepherd and what it means to be a wolf. Okay, so the wolf and the shepherd, it's something that I think is part of every human being. We wonder about everybody has their dark side, but we also have our light side, and we have to feed the light side. So I hope people will pick up The King of Italy. It's been a favorite of my family and people who I've known who have just said over the years, that book has to get out. So it finally got out.
Oh, very cool. Well, that's exciting. I'll definitely leave a link down below to that. He's not the King of Italy, but tell me about what was it like to work with Alex Jones? That guy seems like he's running on 10 cups of Italian espresso every minute of the day.
Yeah. So, I've published 15 books now. So I'm kind of known by publishers as somebody who can get the job done. And so, that my publisher called me up and said, Alex Jones wants to do a book. And so I was like, sure, why not? I'm totally down with it. I was aware of the problems that he'd been in. As an attorney, I'd looked at the case that was brought against him, and I didn't think it really had merit. I thought they denied him his rights. So I just said, I'm totally in. Yep. What can I do to help? I'm going to be the foremost defender of free speech in the United States if I can. And nothing would say that more than helping Alex Jones write a book and save his program, which is essentially what the 2 books that I've written with him have done. And so he was great to work with. I mean, a brilliant, brilliant mind. I would say to him things like, Alex, okay, I understand you're talking about David Rockefeller really, liking the Communist Party even when Mao was in charge. Can you point me to some information? And he'd go, yeah, look up David Rockefeller, 1973, New York Times, just got back from China. And so I type it in, boom, pop right up. Or, I would say things like, Alex, I really don't understand the Jeffrey Epstein story. Was he Israeli intelligence? Because if he's Israeli intelligence, doesn't make sense to me why our intelligence agencies would allow him to work in our country. And I know Ghislaine, there was a claim that her father was British intelligence. I don't understand how all this goes together. And he'd say, wrong narrative. At the top, American, British, and Israeli intelligence are one agency. I go, oh, okay, that makes sense. I don't know if it's true. It's a clear narrative, and there's a good amount of evidence to suggest that's true.
Yeah. He, as I've listened to him, I think, it must be a burden to hold all of that information in your head at once.
Yeah.
But like he was on the Joe Rogan podcast maybe a couple of years ago. They asked him something. He literally started from memory listing all of these headlines and how to search them. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how does he remember stuff from like the 90s and when the internet was brand new? He's pulling these articles out of this old filing cabinet. It's just absolutely incredible to watch somebody do that. Okay.
Yeah, and I've been interviewed by him for a couple times, and the most excited he got in my interview was when I said, as I search for all these things, I got to preserve my little fortress of happiness that I don't let anybody go into. It's like my fortress of joy, So, I fight the devil 2 or 3 hours a day, but then the rest of the day, I'm just having a good time. And he was like, that's great. That's great. I got to remember that fortress of joy. And I was just like, wow, that's what I gave to him. That how can you do this stuff and not go crazy?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, in our final minutes, you've got a book that's in the pre-order. It's about the secret government. Tell us about that, and then lay out just a mini case for why you believe there's a secret government running the country.
So it's called Twilight of the Shadow Government, How Transparency Will Kill the Deep State, co-authored with Kevin Shipp, a 17-year CIA agent. And he goes over his own history with the agency, beginning as basically a guard for the CIA director, William Casey. And it lays out, first chapter is all about Bob Woodward and the lies of Bob Woodward and why Bob Woodward is probably part of Project Mockingbird. I mean, the whole Bob Woodward story of how he goes from naval intelligence to within a year breaking the Watergate story, in which his source is the number 2 guy at the FBI, as well as Alexander Haig, the chief of staff in the Nixon White House, is really just kind of unbelievable. And a lot has come out about Bob Woodward over the years, been covered in some books. And so, we use that to say, like, okay, here's how they lied to you. Just think of like the most credible people you're likely to believe in, and then let us show you how they've probably had an intelligence background. For example, a lot of people do not know that Bill Barr, the 2-time Attorney General of the United States, when he was a young man, declared that he wanted to be head of the CIA and that his first law job was working for the CIA in the closing days of the Vietnam War. So there's a lot of stuff that's really curious. And also the fact that, Bill Barr's dad, Donald Barr, was part of the OSS in World War II. So you kind of start to see all of these little connections, and, they need to be talked about. Maybe there's nothing there, but it's rather interesting that Donald Barr's father gave Jeffrey Epstein his first significant job, and Bill Barr, the son, said, no, he wasn't killed. He hung himself. It was a suicide. I'm sure that's all just a coincidence. But the CIA has been called the world's greatest creator of coincidences. So you just got to put that into your brain and see what happens.
Well, I'm excited for people to read that. I love having those dots connected. I had one just yesterday with someone that I said, wait a minute, why did we pass this $95 billion package and then they put the money for Israel on hold, but then they fast-tracked the money to Ukraine? And he said, oh, that's easy because Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer's family is all from Ukraine. They're Jews from Ukraine, not from Israel. And I was like, oh my gosh, it started to make more sense. So I just love connecting the dots. That's why I love having guests like you on that are like dot connectors for the rest of us.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons that I've been so beloved by the publishers is you go to any of my books, they are thick with references and footnotes, And 80 to 90% of the time, I'm going to like the top sources, New York Times, Washington Post, because what you start to learn is that these groups will tell the truth like 2 or 3 years later. So you just kind of wait for them to reveal something. It might be, the 15th paragraph of an article, and there it is.
Well, that's what they did with the Hunter Biden laptop. I think it was 2 years later they said, "Wow, it looks like this might be true," and then they moved on to something else.
Exactly. So
yeah. Well, Kent, this has been a great discussion. I'll put links down below. Thank you so much for coming on. If people want to follow you online, other than buying your books on Amazon, what's the best way that they can do that?
Follow me on Twitter. I do a couple episodes a week, and just they're a couple minutes long. Just check it in. Just sharing some of my thoughts.
Okay, great. I'll make sure to link that down below. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much.